without putting words in your mouth, reading your article, you don't believe disclosure will ever happen.
Never.
And I
And somebody, probably a congressman, asked him words to the effect of, well, when all of this weird, strange stuff is happening, has anybody died as a result of it? And Grush says, oh, yes. Not one swinging dick followed up with that. Who, what, where, when, why? Nothing. They just moved on. Well, that shows you what a worthless bunch that Congress truly is.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's an ongoing low-grade war going on out in near-Earth space. A shooting war, okay? If there's one group of visitors here, there's no doubt in my mind that there are multiples. We may be an off-ramp on the interstellar highway, so to speak, metaphorically, okay? Over the years, there have been many different descriptions of people seeing various types of objects, craft, if you will, and apparently biological entities. They don't all look the same. And there is a group, and these are the ones I'm particularly interested in, that look, at least on the surface, as human as you or I. But I think what those two possibilities are, warfare and human beings that have been discovered on downed UFOs. Now, what they were doing with them, I don't know, but that's my speculation. And I pretty much verified it that something was discovered with the phenomenon in 47. Something that shook the people in the know to their very core. It ended up being referred to, this thing, whatever it is, as a core secret. A core secret.
Mm-hmm.
And it's surrounded by an SAP, Special Access Program. And there may be 3 or 4 people in the world that has the ability to see behind the curtain with that SAP.
And you talking about the core secret is a base. Correct me if I'm wrong. The core secret covers for the core story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And nobody is talking.
Look,
this field literally has been a joke. Now I'll give you a very quick example, and I may piss off a lot of people. He was the writer who wrote a book called Communion. Okay. Now, Strieber at that time, and I couldn't tell you about today, I haven't talked to him in 30 plus years, but Strieber was one of those guys that believed all of this UFO, UAP, ET business was beneficent. Okay. No threat, no anger. The aliens are here for our benefit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Mike, that pissed me off. Okay. That pissed me off. So I removed it. And then I wrote him a very polite note. I said, David, that's not the appropriate place. You're more than welcome to go on my Dark Matters radio page, not on my personal page. That's my personal page.
Mm-hmm.
And he got all huffy. Well, you're the first guy that ever did that to me before. Well, maybe I'm the first guy that told you to get your shit off my personal Facebook page. Okay. And that's the last contact I had with him. So I got to tell you, that left kind of a sour taste in my mouth. And he ended up writing a book called Behold a Pale Horse. I always referred to it as Behold a Pail of Horse Shit. Out here in Southern California, I got a buddy of mine that was a cop down near where Cooper lived. Now I don't know what demons he was fighting. Obviously, there was something. Okay. He was in Vietnam.
He was
Maybe
drinking
it
those
was
spirits.
wartime. Huh?
He was drinking the spirits.
Oh, yeah. And he had a Chinese national woman for a wife. And they had a little girl. And I felt bad for the kid because he would get liquored up and start raging and knock her around, the wife. And a number of police calls were down there. Okay. Hell, he would he would go to UFO conferences, and in one famous conference that happened down in San Diego, he got into a rolling on the floor fist fight, drunk, obviously, with another guy. And the guy was just wrong, if you know what I mean. Is it possible that we did back engineering on it? Absolutely. Of course, we'd want to see what made these things tick. Okay. How do they fly? How do they achieve these incredible velocities? Why aren't their occupants, their crew people, splashed into strawberry jam because of the G forces? Well, obviously, they found a way to negate gravity somehow. I don't understand it. Maybe the black budget people might. They might be onto something there.
Don Ecker, welcome to Beyond Forbidden. How you doing, man?
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. It's fun to be here.
So we have a little bit of military on both you and myself, and some things similarities, but one thing similar that I really love about you, that I feel a lot of your passion for. You speak what's on your mind. You've been doing this as far as you've been doing it since, I think you said 90, 91.
Yeah. Well, radio. Yeah, I've been in the UFO field since professionally. I had an interest previously, but professionally since 1988. So yeah.
And I remember hearing you on the Paracast, and I don't know, man. I started podcasting in 2010, but I think maybe your first time was 08, 9, maybe. I don't remember.
In 2007.
Okay.
Okay. I officially left the research, for the most part, the research of UFOs. I was still doing my radio shows, but as far as writing for a publication or anything like that, I left it. My wife and I had been publishing UFO magazine, which the magazine began in 1986. My wife was the founder and the editor of UFO magazine. But in the late 90s, we ended up taking on other people into the magazine. And make a long story short, I and either myself or my wife didn't like where it was heading. So in 2006, I bailed, and my wife, Vicky, also bailed right about that time. And the first time you heard me talk about any of that was on the Paracast, which was 2007. Now, at that time, Mike, Gene Steinberg, of course, was the guy that did the Paracast, and he also had the Paracast site. Okay, where there was a lot of discussion. A lot of people would go on there, would talk about various cases, all kinds of stuff. But the other guy that was with Bied or was with Steinberg at that time was a fellow by the name of David Biedney. Are you familiar with Biedney?
Yes, he died 21, 22, or something like that.
Yeah,
I think
yeah. He
23.
he passed on. Yes. But at any rate, that was a one of the first times that I did the Paracast. But my God, I've been in the field since 88, 89. I've done hundreds, if not over 1,000 various radio shows and did television in the early to mid 1990s because of UFO magazine. And there were a lot of things happening then. I was on for several years. It seemed like some program or another almost every week. So yeah, it was a real busy time.
And so we're going to be talking about first off your disclosure article you sent me, and something I mentioned to also Gene back last spring. But before we get into that disclosure, what I was going to tell you, I was going to say for the show. I mentioned this to Gene, and I mentioned this to other guests also. I've interviewed a lot of great people, whether you agree with them or not. They still contributed to the field of research. Stan Freeman, Jesse Marcel Jr., Lloyd Pye, which is a little bit offshoot, but still on the same.
The Star Child.
Yes.
Yeah. I knew all those guys.
And my thing is, people are calling themselves researchers because now the younger, it's nothing wrong with it, but they're more keyboard warriors, I guess. They are researchers on X or whatever. My thing is, I'm a big fan of the old school researchers. So many people like you, Gene, he had on his show, people that I interviewed back in the day who are no longer with us. They paved the way for where we are now. And where I'm getting at, Don, is that I feel like the younger generation now, they don't remember where we came from. They do not. I know I'm over encompassing this and I'm over, kind of collectivizing this, but in general, I would say they don't know the history of the UFO subject, where the people like you and so many great minds that came before us paved the way for us where we are now. And they don't realize that we stand on the shoulders of those people that paved the way for where we are now. And I respect people like you, so many other people that I ain't got to agree with 100%. It doesn't matter. They did so much for the field. And I just appreciate you coming on. And I just wished more people would. Here's something else that really gets them underneath my skin, Don, is a lot of this material that I see on X that people post, these people that really don't know the history of people like you and so many other people that paved the way for us and people before you. They think a lot of this material is new. It is not. Am I wrong, Don?
No, no. You see, you know that I speak my mind.
And that's what I love about it. Yeah, about you.
I wouldn't give two pisses in a snowdrift for most researchers today, the people that call themselves researchers. I'm a retired cop, okay? When I got involved in this, I went out into the field as a detective back in the very early 80s. I investigated a number of cattle mutilations. Okay. I was literally out there up to my elbows in dead cattle. Okay. The people today, the keyboard warriors that haven't been out in, as a matter of fact, the majority of them, I don't believe, would have a clue or could buy a vowel, okay, on how to conduct an investigation. Uh,
Well, I found it on Google, Don.
what?
I'm just
Oh,
paraphrasing.
yeah,
I
yeah,
found it
yeah,
on Google, Don. Come on now.
yeah, yeah. Well, if it's on Google, it must be real, right? It's got to be the real thing. No, but that's what is so sad about this time. All right, that we're currently inhabiting. Uh, this field literally has been a joke. Now I'll give you a very quick example, and I may piss off a lot of people when I say this, but hey, it is what it is. I lived the time. I knew the people. I walked that walk, and back in the early '90s, okay, it was a volatile time. George Knapp from KLAS television, Channel 8 down in Vegas, had broke that huge story on the Bob Lazar thing. Okay, Robert Lazar. Uh, I was I was down in Vegas. I was sitting in Lazar's house. I was interviewing him. Okay. Now, at the risk of sounding a little full of myself, I have, and I had to have, an excellent bullshit detector. Okay. When I was a cop, because believe me, when I tell you what, I've had some of the most talented bullshit artists in the world try to run stuff past me, not only in the criminal field, but also in the UFO field. And one of those guys I first encountered in July of 1988. Now, uh, in '88, there was a became international web sites called the Paranet. Are you familiar with Paranet?
A little bit because I've heard you mention it before on a previous show. I don't probably years ago.
Well, there was a guy, and he kind of dropped off the radar by the name of Jim Spicer in Fountain Hills, Arizona.
It was a message board, right? Basically, kind of like that.
Yes, yes. But, okay, as it grew in popularity, Paranet sites cropped up literally all around the globe. The United Kingdom, France, Germany, hell, even in Russia, Japan, Australia, okay, and all across the United States. And the things that were going on then, and like I said, it was a very volatile time. A tremendous amount of UFO cases and situations were going on, starting about 80. Well, actually, if you get right down to it, 1980 in Woolbridge, UK, the famous Bentwaters case. Okay. Now, just about that time, a number of things started to happen. One thing that happened that literally at the time practically turned the field upside down. A UFO researcher by the name of Bill Moore, wrote a book called The Roswell Incident. Now, up to that point, nobody since 1947 had heard about Roswell. All right. But Moore knew Major Jesse Marcel. And after he retired from the Air Corps, the Army Air Corps, before it became the Air Force, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel. Okay. A lot of people never mention that, but his retired rank was lieutenant colonel. Now, Marcel had been the intelligence officer, okay, at the Roswell Army Airfield where this incident happened. Well, that book was fantastic. Stanton Friedman was involved deeply and heavily into that case. And then the RAF Woolbridge case happened, Christmas 1980, where the alleged UFO landed in the woods outside of the airbase. All these cases were starting to come forward. In 84, CNN, okay, when they were still a real news channel, CNN ran a series of reports on the Woolbridge case. I knew the reporter. Okay, right now his name escaped me, but I knew the reporter that did that show. Later, this guy had been through special forces in the army. Okay, his wife and him were there was an attempted robbery. All right, some armed thugs broke into a hotel room where they were at. He ended up getting in a shootout with them. He got winged, okay, but he put these guys down. I mean, this was when I tell you it was wild woolly, trust me, it was. And then in 86, the Japanese airliner over Alaska, that case happened. The guy was carrying a load, as a matter of fact, my favorite dinner wine, Beaujolais, all right, from France. He was flying back to Japan when he encountered that, according to him, and the FAA at the time, before they got shut up, a aircraft carrier sized UFO that he described as being shaped like a walnut. All of these cases were coming out. Then in Florida, and when I tell you it was wild woolly, my God, the Gulf Breeze case broke. All right. Now, a lot of these cases today are virtually unknown. That group of younger people that you're referring to, Mike, as researchers today, probably don't have a clue about who a lot of these people were or the cases. For example, I cut my teeth on people like Donald Kehoe. I cut my teeth, and I'm sure you've heard of Don Kehoe, right?
Yeah, that's where Richard Dolan got his publishing from, kind of off of the offshoot of that. Keyhole Publishing, Keyhole Publishing.
Don Kehoe. Okay, now unfortunately he passed on before I entered the field officially. He died in 86. I entered in 88. But Dick Hall, Richard Hall, who had been Kehoe's administrative assistant at NICAP. I knew Dick very well. Both my wife and I knew Dick very well. Ivan Sanderson, who during the Second World War was in the United Kingdom's MI6, British intelligence during the war, became a noted writer and investigator, especially with crypto reports and crypto animals. This guy at the time was famous, my God. And there were actually so many others that today are virtually unknown. Here's what I did when I decided, because I had something happen to me personally that convinced me, because at the time I had been wounded in the line of duty in 86, and I ended up medically retiring from the law enforcement. And I had just at that time gone through a divorce, okay, my former spouse. So here I was basically bouncing around my townhouse, looking for something, anything to keep me involved. And I ended up buying my first computer system at Radio Shack, a Tandy 1000 EX. Okay. And by the time I had that thing done, okay, because I was buying all the bells and whistles for it, boy, I thought I was going someplace with that system. And a friend of mine, who, by the way, happened to be the MUFON state director for the state of Idaho, a guy by the name of Don Mason, came to me one day and he said, Don, he said, I just had something cross my desk that I got to be honest, I don't know what to say about it. He said, I, I know you were an investigator for cattle mutilation, right? And I said, yeah. He said, well, this is a human being that was discovered dead in the woods, dead, mutilated, almost like a cow. The only thing he had on him was a pair of underwear, but his rectum had been cored out. His sexual organs had been removed. And I mean, you know, I heard that and I literally, I kind of got sick. So I did a little investigation. I got in touch with the agency and they weren't saying much. All right. Because I wasn't in the fold anymore, if you know what I mean. But I got enough information that I decided
just to
I
cut
got,
it, just to cut in, this was all during the 80s, what, the satanic panic. So a lot of people are already kind of in a
yeah. But this had nothing to do with that. Believe me, nothing. Because that was an angle I checked on. So, make a long story short, I ended up on an almost 4-year investigation investigating the phenomenon of human mutilations. And I gathered a heck of a lot of information. Now, at this time, I was the director of research for UFO magazine. I had run in the magazine several stories about this. And let me tell you what, I stepped on some huge toes. As a matter of fact, in one instance, my wife and I were at a conference in Connecticut, and we were walking past a lecture hall that at that time was just finishing up a talk by Whitley Strieber. Now, everybody knows, or at least did know who Whitley Strieber was. He was the writer who wrote a book called Communion. Okay. Now, Strieber at that time, and I couldn't tell you about today, I haven't talked to him in 30 plus years, but Strieber was one of those guys that believed all of this UFO, UAP, ET business was beneficent. Okay. No threat, no anger. The aliens are here for our benefit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, quite frankly, Mike, I always thought that was a load of crap. We don't know why they're here. And when we start talking about disclosure, I'll go into this in more detail. We don't know why they're here. They haven't told us. Do I think that there have been communications between elements of the American government and these visitors? Absolutely, I do. And I'll go even a little bit further. This is kind of a tease, but I personally am convinced there are representatives of those visitors that are walking among us today, passing as human beings. Now, I have a lot of reasons for saying that, but be that as it may. But Strieber, as we were walking past the hall, the doors flew open. He and his wife, he was married to a woman, I believe, not too awfully long after she passed on from an illness or something. But they came out, they saw my wife and I walking. This was right after I had written an article on the human mutilation thing, and they started screaming like lunatics at us for besmirching these beneficent, wonderful ETs. How dare we? Well, look, I figured the guy was out of his freaking mind, and I just ignored him. We kept walking on. But that's the kind of business that I started to experience by a lot of luminaries at that time in the UFO field. Bud Hopkins knew Bud very well. Bud is one of the premier, or was one of the premier researchers on human alien abductions. And there were a number of others. Bill Moore, the guy I mentioned about the Roswell thing, he got on my case about that. Look, it was very simple for me, okay? When I investigated a case, a crime, could have been anything, could have been murder, child abuse, child rape, whatever the case was, I went where the facts led me. And in the case of human mutilations, there have been a number of those things that have happened that are inexplicable. Okay. Now, thankfully, it doesn't seem to be huge and widespread, but it has happened. Now, that's not to say that I'm placing all the blame squarely on the UFO UAP phenomenon. Personally, I think there is some. Now, I'll tell you what convinced me I was on the right track. About 1989, I was in my townhouse. I was working on something on my computer. The phone rang and I answered it. And it was a guy calling me from Florida. And he identified himself as a DEA agent. Okay. He told me what bureau he was with. And I was kind of surprised because not long before that happened, I had released my initial investigation about human mutilations on the Paranet. Now, like I said, that went all over the country. It also went around the world to those countries that had Paranet nodes in them. And but I was kind of surprised, and I said, "Yeah, okay." He said, "Look," he said, "I got to tell you, when I first read that, I thought you were out of your mind." And I said, "Well, buddy, get in line because there are other ones that thought that too." He said, "Well, I started doing a little investigation, and then I sent an inquiry to NCIC." Now, he was a federal law enforcement officer. Okay. He would have had the ability and the authorization to do that. And he said, "I saw some stuff in there, Don." He said, "All I'm going to tell you is this." He said, "You do whatever it is you want to do. But if I were you, I would back away from that. And I said, oh, okay, well, thanks. I didn't. And I never had, that I know of, any Men in Black show up or anything like that. But yeah, it was some wild and woolly stuff. Now, in the early to mid 90s, I told you that I had broken, or that I had been on a number of television shows, especially with cases I had broken. In 1991, now I knew the producer that was producing the Larry King Live show on the CNN. And at that time, that was a pretty big TV show.
Mm-hmm.
And his name was Tom Farmer. So I had, well, I knew some people. Well, I knew a lot of people in Europe. And I ended up meeting Dr. Marina Popovich from the former USSR. Okay. Now, Dr. Popovich was a retired Red Air Force colonel, a woman. Okay. She even underwent cosmonaut training. And her ex husband was General Pavel Popovich, the first human being back in 61 or 62 that in his spacecraft rendezvoused with another spacecraft in orbit. Now, you're a bit younger than me. I don't know if you will remember in the 70s, after we stopped going to the moon, okay, the program we ran, and there was still a USSR then with the Soviets, where we met a spacecraft of theirs in orbit, Skylab, okay, and we had basically the first for a short while. Skylab was the first, like the ISS is today. Well, Marina Popovich, after the Iron Curtain fell, and the Russians at that time were selling everything after the Communist Party collapsed, except their underwear to make bucks. Okay, their ruble at that time wasn't worth anything. And she came over here and I met her, and she was going down to Tucson, Arizona to give a lecture. Now, she didn't speak any English, so she had a translator with her, but I was able to follow her down to Tucson and interviewed her over a 2-day period, okay, while she was down there to give these talks. And one of the big reasons I wanted to do that was, are you familiar with Zachariah Sitchin?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Sitchin was a personal friend of mine. And every time one of his new books would come out, we would get it. And I would read it and then end up doing a review on it. Well, back about 89 or so, one of his books came out titled Genesis Revisited.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I read that book and it blew my mind. And there were several photographs in there. Now, I'll be the first to tell you. To me, NASA, NASA, has always meant, to me, never a straight answer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And believe me, when I was the director of research at UFO magazine, I had contacts with everybody: the Pentagon, NASA, the Defense Department. Hell, I even got Marlon Fitzwater on the phone. Do you know who that was?
I've heard. I don't remember off the top of my head. I remember you mentioning before on.
George H.W. Bush's press secretary, the old man. Okay, not George W., but George
There,
H.
I remember you talking about there was a deep rabbit hole with him.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember what it was though.
Well, Mikhail Gorbachev stayed in office, was the premier of the USSR until the Communist Party collapsed. And they basically went through a revolution. But in 88, 89, something happened that, well, let me just give you a little background. So, in Sitchin's book, there were several photographs where he talked about some of his contacts in the former Soviet Union, put him onto the story that the Russians had sent 2 probes to Mars, okay, that they launched in 88. Phobos 1 and Phobos 2. Now, roughly a month or so after Phobos 1 was launched, they lost it. It disappeared. And the Russian Glavkosmos, their space agency, said they figured out it was a combination of human operator and software algorithms or something that weren't compatible, and the thing just flew away. Never got it back. However, Phobos 2 made it to Mars. On board Phobos 2 was an extraordinarily powerful laser. Okay. And they were going to put it in orbit around Mars and Mars, moon, Phobos. Now, what for? Well, unbeknownst to the majority of the public, that's you and me, behind the scenes, there were talks between NASA and Glavkosmos about doing a joint human manned mission to Mars. Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts. And at that time, okay, it wasn't even 1990 yet, they were theorizing that this would happen maybe around 2014, 2015. Okay. So Phobos 2 got up there. What the Russian plan was, because it's so peculiar, they wanted to use that laser to fire laser bursts into the Martian moon Phobos to see what it was made out of. Because originally, what they were thinking, and I guess NASA by default, was if they sent this man mission to Mars, they would land on Phobos and then use Phobos as a stepping stone down to Mars. Well, now there's a lot of weirdness to begin with about Phobos and its sister moonlet Deimos. Okay. Phobos and Deimos were not even discovered until about 1877, or right in that time period, which is unusual because we had telescopes that could have sighted them 100 years before that. All right. But they had never been discovered until 1977. Now, here's something else that a lot of people are not aware of. The British Royal Astronomical Society had been keeping an eye on Mars and also the moon. Okay. The moon is especially peculiar because they had detailed a lot of reports of lunar activity, including inexplicable lights on the lunar surface, as if somebody were there. Now, to get back to Mars, the other oddity about Phobos and Deimos that is not prevalent anywhere else that I'm aware of, they are in a retrograde orbit. In other words, compared to everybody else, they're flying backwards. Now, the Soviets, in as early as the 50s, the Soviets, and I forget the guy's name, he was a big Soviet astronomer, had a theory working that Phobos, especially Phobos, might be artificial. They were working on the theory that somebody put it into orbit. Okay, and what is it? The damn thing looks like a big potato, right? Well, now let's jump forward to the late 1980s, early 1990s. The Phobos 2 probe gets to Mars. It's got now this is what I'm reading in Sitchin's book, Genesis Revisited. Gets to Mars and it takes photographs of Mars, of Phobos, and disturbingly, it photographs a number of hot spots on Mars. Hot spots, as if there's some type of facility or something down there. Okay. Now, later on, astronomers have come forward and suggested, well, Mars has an active volcanic system. Not anywhere recently they have. All right. It's unlikely that it's volcanic action. But whatever it is, that wasn't the weirdest part. The weirdest part was one of the photographs that the Phobos 2 probe took was of Mars and Mars' atmosphere. Now, a lot of people don't know that Mars, in fact, does have an atmosphere. Nothing that you or I could breathe, but it is there. A lot of gases and things that would kill us in a second, but it does have an atmosphere. And reflected off that atmosphere by this photograph that Phobos took was a huge ellipsoid shadow. Now, Phobos was turned around. Directly behind Phobos was this immense object. This is not me saying this. This is what Glad Cosmos said. An object that was apparently cigar shaped. It was 25 kilometers in length. That's, by the way, 15 and a half miles. And approximately 1.5 kilometers or somewhere in that in that ballpark of being roughly a mile wide in diameter. Now, if that is true, and I secured the first photograph of that from Marina Popovich after she left here went back to Russia, and then came back in the fall for some more TV and speaking engagements. But she brought me a picture. I asked her specifically about what Sitchin had to say, that they had a photograph that had never been released, where she got her hands on. And I showed that on Larry King Live. Okay. Now, what happened? According to the Russians, and they're theorizing, this is speculation. They don't know this for an absolute fact. But this object, if it were artificial, and I have no doubt it was, detected that laser on their probe, the object turned toward it and then rammed it,
Hmm.
destroying it. Now, even Glav Cosmos, in their public announcement about this, state that something struck their probe and turned it into a spinner, knocked it right out of the ballpark. That was the end of it. So, when I tell you there were some wild and woolly things going on then, Mike, believe me, there were.
To go along with everything you were talking about, moon, Phobos, Russians, even with the human mutilations earlier, where does that tie in to disclosure, in your opinion? Because everything is interconnected some way. And why do they? Why isn't that information being? Let's go to the human mutilations. Why isn't that being disclosed? What
Why
are
do
they?
you think?
What are
Why
they?
do you think? Why do you think if they would, a government official would come out and say something to the effect of, oh, yeah, yeah, well, actually, we've known UFOs are real for, roughly 80 plus years now. People were seeing them back. As a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, go and read your Bible. You'll find accounts of inexplicable, weird visions and things that people reported, like Ezekiel's wheel. Okay. We find out that Alexander the Great, on some of his campaigns, talked about witnessing flaming shields in the sky that dove at his army when he was going from Afghanistan into India. Uh, we find out in some of the old pharaonic texts that ancient Egyptians reported these things. Mike, this is an
Do you think?
old story.
But I don't. Do I think that? I think it was the Brookings report with, to sum it up, that there will be panic. But do you? Yes, I do think there will be panic. But the thing is,
Not panic that they're here necessarily or they're real, but that's not what you said. Why don't they talk about human mutilations?
yes, because that's all a part of it. Yes.
Well, hell, that's a no brainer. It would terrify people. Uh, Look, since day one, for me, I'm talking about me personally, since day one, I have thought that this is stupid. What is the reticence of acknowledging that there are apparently machines flying through our skies that defy everything we know about avionics, that can go at incredible velocities, incidentally, not causing any sonic booms? What's up with that? Okay. That can outfly anything that we currently have publicly on the table. Now, do I, and this is an aside, do I think that we've recovered technology. Absolutely. Yes, we have. No doubt in my military mind, not a bit. Is it possible that we did back engineering on it? Absolutely. Of course, we'd want to see what made these things tick. Okay. How do they fly? How do they achieve these incredible velocities? Why aren't their occupants, their crew people, splashed into strawberry jam because of the G forces? Well, obviously, they found a way to negate gravity somehow. I don't understand it. Maybe the black budget people might. They might be onto something there. But I started wondering about that, and then I got involved. And boy, I've talked in the last 37, 38 years, thousands of people from all walks of life. I've talked to government people. I've talked to government contractors. I've talked to astronauts. I knew Colonel Gordon Cooper, original Mercury 7 astronaut. I knew him very well. I knew people that have been involved in intelligence matters. Okay. Uh, there's a vast, untold story there. And then there are the collateral damage, human beings that have had their lives and their careers destroyed, okay, in pursuit of this. One guy, I literally watched back in about 1990, 91, when a incommunicado Air Force general officer in civilian clothes, an FBI agent who was with him, one other guy, I don't have a clue who he was, exposed this guy to a classified program. Now, look, first, let me say this. You know, I was in the Army, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I did?
I feel like it was part of some type of intelligence, right?
Yes, Army Security Agency. Okay, back in those days, that's what it was called. That's all been folded into the entire intel community now. But we were running operations in Southeast Asia during the war, okay, with North Vietnam and all the other communists that were over there. So I have somewhat, let's say, of a working knowledge how these things work. This guy worked, the guy that I knew worked as an engineer for a government contract organization that built spy satellites. Okay, the DSP-1. Now, what these were satellites that are put in geosynchronous orbit that are continually scanning for ICBM launches. Depending upon how sensitive they have these things tuned from orbit, they have the potential to detect a barbecue grill in your backyard if they wanted to. That's how these things work. Well,
Why do I get that you're leaning or you're about to say something they can even take UFOs?
well, let me finish. So my friend, okay, his name was Lee Graham. Lee, somewhere along the line, got a bug up his saddle and something had happened, or he was exposed to something, and he wanted to find out exactly what the government, specifically the United States Air Force, knew and was hiding about UFOs. Well, he became a real honest to God FOIA warrior, Freedom of Information Act,
Mhm.
and he snowed them under. As a matter of fact, because of him and his buddy that he worked with also at this defense firm, guy by the name of Ron Reguera, ended up proving that this satellite system had, in fact, been detecting UFOs coming from deep space. Now, how did they do that? One of these objects, these unidentified craft, flew in from behind one of these satellites. Now, there's in geosynchronous orbit. Okay, how do they do that? Well, they have sensors on these satellites that lock onto fixed stars in the heavens. The problem was when this UFO came in, the sensor inadvertently locked onto that. Okay.
Mm.
Pulled the damn thing out of orbit. Well, not all the way out of orbit, pulled it out of its geosynchronous orbit. Well, they finally got somebody to admit that it happened. Well, somewhere up the line of command decided this guy is a pain in the ass. So they set up this thing, and he was trying to find out because he had somewhere along the line heard a code name, or allegedly a code name, called senior citizen. Does that strike a bell with you?
Elaborate more on that, Don.
Senior citizen was the code name for the F-117 stealth fighter, but it hadn't been released yet. Okay, it was still top secret. However, they were getting ready to release that. And we all know Desert Shield, Desert Storm. That's where this thing first showed its chops after the war started with Saddam Hussein in Iraq. But anyway, before any of that, these guys came to Lee's workspace. Now, according to their company policy, anytime an outsider came in, the worker had to have his supervisor there in order to make sure everything was on the up and up, everything was copacetic. Lee's supervisor came in, the FBI guy threw him out. Now, that would have made me hanky right there. But he's standing there, Lee's standing there, and they said, well, Mr. Graham, you know, you've been so diligent in trying to find out a lot of this stuff. We decided to come down here and show you something. Now, Lee had, because of his job, a secret clearance. Secret, not top secret.
Mm-hmm.
What they did was open up a file from a briefcase that clearly stated top secret, eyes only. Lee, they made him sign a document that he was shown this. Then, after it was all said and done, they showed him the F-117 stealth. When it was all said and done, they tried to get him fired from his job because he was exposed to top secret classified information. You see how they work?
Being military police, I had secret clearance, and you couldn't see anything above that. You can get trouble, court martialed or whatever, and go to Leavenworth. It just depends. And what else do you think?
Mhm.
Now, if they skip forward just a little bit, if they had that type of technology then, Don,
Well, of course they did.
what do you think they have now? You know what I mean? Especially when AI is involved, everything is getting more integrated with technology.
I think that they're well on their way to anti-gravitic technology. As a matter of fact, I have a close friend. He lives further up north, who has worked for the Atomic Energy Commission. He's worked for the Defense Department. He's retired, but he's convinced we have a secret space program right now in operation. Can he prove it? Well, no. But if you listen to his thinking along the lines that he's saying A and B comes to C, and then you go to D, E, F, okay? And he's convinced that there's a program ongoing right now. And if you ever go to the ISS video feed, have you ever gone there?
It's been a while, but yes, I have.
Okay. Every once in a while you're up there watching the video feed, you'll see something strange, obtuse, something weird flying into the screen, right? And what happens? Immediately they lose the feed.
Mhm.
Okay.
How
That's part of
convenient.
what that's part of what my friend, is saying. Yeah, I'm convinced there's something up there.
So, without putting words in your mouth, reading your article, you don't believe disclosure will ever happen.
Never.
And I agree with that. My thing is, you have some that say that we can't handle the truth. It's too scary. Yes,
Well, if you read my paper, okay, you know that I've been jumping into this for a very long time. And I said in the paper, and I pretty much verified it, that something was discovered with the phenomenon in 47. Something that shook the people in the know to their very core. It ended up being referred to, this thing, whatever it is, as a core secret. A core secret.
Mhm.
And it's surrounded by an SAP, Special Access Program. And there may be 3 or 4 people in the world that has the ability to see behind the curtain with that SAP.
And you talking about the core secret is a base. Correct me if I'm wrong. The core secret covers for the core story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And nobody is talking. Look, like I said earlier, I've talked to well over 1,000 people over the years, maybe even more than that. I don't remember. And what I've heard things, Mike, some of it I've dismissed out of hand. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have, but I've dismissed a lot out of hand, thinking these people are out of their minds. But then I remember for 3, almost 4 years, I was following the human mutilation thing. I investigated cattle mutilations. I've heard some stories that would curl your hair, quite frankly, over the years. Now, like I said earlier, I go where the facts take me. Uh, could I, beyond any doubt, go into a court of law, raise my hand, testify that I know what this is. No way. Never. No, I couldn't because I don't. But I do have a logical mind. I follow a lot of these things to their, what I think is their logical conclusion. And one thing that I have no doubt about, none, okay, there is something that is being hidden. And just by, hey, look, when I first started and I talked about it, which I probably shouldn't have, my research into human mutilations, guess what happened to my computer? Somebody threw a logic bomb into it. I had to replace the thing. This is like 93, okay, somewhere in there, about 93.
You're getting too close to the darker aspects of the truth.
Well, I was upsetting someone. Okay, I was upsetting someone. Now, who that was, I don't know.
I have a feeling that human mutilation part ties into David Pleiades' missing 401 also. What do you think about that?
Okay, look,
In some way, shape, or fashion.
I'm gonna tell you a little story about Pleiades. Pleiades was a cop. Okay, I met him on the phone. I mean, we were never in the same room together. Maybe 15 years or so ago. Now, at that time, I was doing my Dark Matters radio show 5 nights a week on the Cyber Station USA radio network out of Boston. I became aware of his books he was writing, 411, got my hands on one or two of them, read them, and then I tracked him down and I invited him on my show. He came on, and look, I'm not a slow puppy, okay? I read into things. And the way he was talking, we were talking about missing people, especially in national forests, what have you, missing people. And in my mind, I started putting two and two together. And it came up Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti. And I asked him about that. And buddy, at that time, he danced all the way around the mulberry bush. He wasn't going to talk about that. Why? I don't know. But I didn't need a house to fall on me, okay, to understand that's where he was heading. Well, that show was wildly received by my audience. They loved it. So, sometime later, I had a number of people get in touch with me and say, Don, you ought to have David Pleiades come back on. Well, I said, yeah, it's about time. So I had his phone number, called him up, phone rang 2 or 3 times. Suddenly, somebody picked up the receiver and set it back down. I said, what's up with that? So I waited a minute and I called back. Same thing. Well, I don't know if he had caller ID, knew who, I don't know. All right. So I said, fine, this guy, for whatever reason, he don't want to talk to anybody. Okay, that's cool. So I took his number and I put it away. Well, a number of years later on Facebook, okay, I get a note from him. He wants to be Facebook friends. Oh, sure. You bet. I immediately clicked accept. Okay. 30 freaking seconds later, on my personal Facebook page, not my Dark Matters radio page, on my personal page, he puts up a whole commercial slew on his damn books and his research and everything else. Well, Mike, that pissed me off. Okay? That pissed me off. So I removed it. And then I wrote him a very polite note. I said, David, that's not the appropriate place. You're more than welcome to go on my Dark Matters radio page, not on my personal page. That's my personal page.
Mm-hmm.
And he got all huffy. Well, you're the first guy that ever did that to me before. Well, maybe I'm the first guy that told you to get your shit off my personal Facebook page. Okay? And that's the last contact I had with him. So I got to tell you, that left kind of a sour taste in my mouth.
Yeah, I've never had him on the show. Maybe he thinks he's gotten too big to where he don't want to come on my show. That's something else that aggravates me is that a lot of these people, and I've had a lot of big names on this, in the field on the show since 2010. But what I've noticed is that in the early parts of a lot of people's careers, they'll go out, to a smaller podcast and my podcast isn't small. It is compared to some of the ones that has these studios, these $1 million studios. Yes. But they'll come to you. They'll even send you emails to come on asking to be on your show. And what I've noticed over the years, once they get out there, they get popular, they go on the conference tours and all that. Once they get out there and big, then they're like, and then let's say you want to have them back on. Nah, I'm too busy. Now they forget about you because now they've made it big on the the conference tour and they're making these big shows, either maybe mainstream media or whatever.
Well, you know what, Mike? I'll tell you right now. That's the thing about me. I remember when I was a nobody. Okay? When I was a nobody, nobody knew who I was. They might have seen my name in UFO magazine. So what? And I am one of those people that believe in treating everybody with respect, hearing them out, seeing what they had to say. Now, like this morning, when I wrote you a note, I was looking for your podcast, and so I couldn't find it. Okay. So what did I do? I sent you a note and said, hey, where is it? And you immediately sent me a bunch of links. So I knew up front you were on the straight path, straight and narrow. But I've had people in the past, I'm not going to go into it, that for whatever reason tried to ambush me. And one of them was because of a series of exposés I did on a guy, both written and on my radio show, using his own voice, his own words, a guy by the name of Milton William Cooper, Bill Cooper. Okay, now I knew this guy when he first surfaced, way back when, July of '88. And he ended up writing a book called Behold a Pale Horse. I always referred to it as Behold a Pail of Horse Shit. But he wrote this book. It is one of the most read books. Guess where?
Everywhere.
The American prison system.
Oh, yes. I remember you mentioned that before. Yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Makes you wonder,
Now,
right?
I upset a lot of Cooper fans. Believe me, I did. At one point, okay, I served in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, and Okinawa for 26 months. Okay, I was wounded twice in combat. And as a result of that, I'm very proud of my veteran status. Cooper is one of those people that his attitude was, if you hurt me, I'm going to destroy you. And back in the day, he started sending around that I was a phony, stolen valor warrior. I never went to Vietnam. I never served in Vietnam. Okay, well, it took me 15 seconds to show he was full of it, but that's the kind of thing he would do. So, needless to say, he was not on my favorite list of people. And if anybody asked me, and back then a lot of people did, what my attitude was and why do I have that attitude, I would show them. And so as a result, he was a hero in many of the disaffected eyes. And as a result of that, I was on a hate list for a long time, probably still am. But what happened to Cooper? Well, in November of 2001, the guy was a raging alcoholic. Okay. When he lived out here in Southern California, I got a buddy of mine that was a cop down near where Cooper lived. Now I don't know what demons he was fighting. Obviously there was something. Okay. He was in Vietnam.
He was
Maybe
drinking
it
those
was
spirits.
wartime. Huh?
He was drinking the spirits.
Oh yeah. And he had a Chinese national woman for a wife. And they had a little girl. And I felt bad for the kid because he would get liquored up and start raging and knock her around, the wife. And a number of police calls were down there. Okay. Hell, he would he would go to UFO conferences, and in one famous conference that happened down in San Diego, he got into a rolling on the floor fist fight, drunk, obviously, with another guy. And the guy was just wrong, if you know what I mean. So anyway, yeah, it upset the T card when I did my exposés. But hey, when I was a cop, I did cases too that upset people, and that's just the way it is.
So we're about to round things up for this time here in just a minute, but I got to ask you one thing. And of course, I want to know what your gut tells you.
About
Disclosure. Okay, so within your article, I saw several times where you point out the core secret. What does your gut tell you? I'm asking you to speculate with all your years of research. What do you think that core secret is that they're hiding, Don?
well, I think it could be actually two things. This is speculation.
Yes, because it's hard to get the truth whenever this stuff is hidden.
So if I had to go to court and testify to this, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But this is what my speculation is.
Your years as a police officer, military, and just your years of research. That's what I want to know is what your gut tells you.
I think there's an ongoing low-grade war going on out in near Earth space. A shooting war. Okay. If there's one group of visitors here, there's no doubt in my mind that there are multiples. We may be an off ramp on the interstellar highway, so to speak, metaphorically. Okay. Over the years, there have been many different descriptions of people seeing various types of objects, craft, if you will, and apparently biological entities. They don't all look the same. And there is a group, and these are the ones I'm particularly interested in, that look, at least on the surface, as human as you or I. But I think what those two possibilities are warfare and human beings that have been discovered on downed UFOs. Now, what they were doing with them, I don't know, but that's my speculation.
What would I'm asking you to speculate again? One last question. What would the implications be for humanity if we ever somehow one day did get full disclosure on everything? Maybe something happened, like some type of AI hacker. I don't know. What would the implications be for humanity, in your opinion?
I don't think it would be allowed to happen, Mike. I don't think it would be allowed. Look, in my paper, I talk about three major incidents that happened in the immediate aftermath of the Roswell event, end of June, beginning of July 1947. Within weeks of that, suddenly the Army Air Corps, which had been with us since flight, okay, back in the early days of World War One, it was always the Army and then the Navy that had air arms. But the Army Air Corps was stripped away from the Army Air Corps. It became a separate service entity, the U.S. Air Force. Now, incidentally and surprisingly, they are the only service organization that has said absolutely nothing about UFO UAPs. The Navy's talked about it, everybody else has talked about it. The Air Force just shrugs their shoulders. Now, they were the guys and gals in charge of this from the very beginning. So, do they have a good idea what's going on? You bet. But they ain't talking, Bubba. Ain't talking. That's number one. Number two, all through the Second World War, the greatest war in human history, we had countries starting out the war on boots and saddles, horses. Within 4 or 5 years, we ended the war. How? Nuclear weapons. We literally went from horse flesh to nuclear fusion. Eye-blinkingly fast. All right? Didn't have a CIA then. Didn't have a central intelligence agency.
They got a hold of something. They had to keep it the core secret hidden.
Suddenly, in the aftermath of Roswell, the CIA is brought into the fold. That's number two. The third thing, and the most ominous thing of all for me, they signed into law the National Security Act. Didn't even have it in the Second World War. We were trying to figure out how to build atomic weapons. We didn't have anything like that. But then it got signed into law. And what does it say? Well, the pinnacle for me is if something is deemed, a threat to national security, anything up to and including premeditated murder.
I got that in my notes. Premeditated murder that you talk about. Yeah.
Now, during the David Grush congressional hearings, and this is something that blew my mind, and my buddy Chris DePerno, the other retired cop on UAP Crossfire. We're watching this, and somebody, probably a congressman, asked him words to the effect of, well, when all of this weird, strange stuff is happening, has anybody died as a result of it? And Grush says, oh, yes. Not one swinging dick followed up. with that. Who, what, where, when, why? Nothing. They just moved on. Well, that shows you what a worthless bunch that Congress truly is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's the first thing. And I looked at, well, not, I talked to him on the phone. I said, Chris, what is this all about? He says, man, I don't know. I don't know. But they don't seem like they really care. So there you go.
Well, Don, let's wrap it up for this time. I want to get you back on. Go down. We can start where we're leaving off now, more in the disclosure part. But man, like I said, this is treat, honor, and privilege. I've been following your work for a long time. Finally got you back, or finally got you on the show. But thank you very much for you and so many others in your era to help pave the way where we are today. Thank you very much, Don.
You're welcome.